Workspace permissions are, of course, what's on the outside, the external permissions. And then, of course, there's the items inside. One thing to remember with Fabric is that the lakehouse and the warehouse nearly have identical security elements. There's really not much differentiation, and none that I'm going to be discussing today. And all of those, of course, use OneLake. And there are additional OneLake security permissions that you can employ that I want to talk about, because you can secure OneLake independent of course, your workspace. So for those of you who are familiar with Power BI, the workspace security is the same. You have the administrative level, naturally gives you everything, member permissions, and that's nearly everything that admin has. With member, though, you cannot remove the workspace, which of course is different from member. And you can add people. With contributor, you can not add people, but you can, of course, do everything that you need to do within the workspace. And viewer means you can just view. Now, next up, of course, there is item level security. So anything within any data element within your workspace, you can grant access to. So if you wish to give access to a lakehouse or warehouse, you can simply click on that ellipse where Microsoft hides all the cool stuff and grant access to people, or I hope Entra security groups. Good of Microsoft to rename them, since they're not called Azure Active Directory anymore. They're called Entra. And that is where you are can grant people access to an individual item within the workspace. They do not have to have access to the workspace to be able to have access to items within it, which can get confusing. Really, there's no way then of seeing who has access to what outside of looking at the APIs. So keep that in mind. And you can do security on the endpoint as well. So let's talk about what you can do with the endpoint, because I know that this is not an area that a lot of people think about, where that they can implement security. So if we're looking at your endpoint, you can do all sorts of different levels of object security. So what you can do with endpoint security is that gets into doing what you might have done if you have been working in SQL Server in the past. You can grant or remove access for users or groups. You can revoke or deny permissions on the ability to see things, and you can implement data masking. So let's take a look at that. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I have two different SQL Server Management Studios open, and they are not the same. Let me blow this up so that you can see this. So back to, all right, if we look here at the bottom, pull this up, you can see that I'm logged into this one. Naturally, this on my tenant, I have all the rights. So I have, of course, to show you how this works, have another user, because I'm too lazy to create a security group just for development purposes, that does not have security rights. So Renee is my user that I'm going to use for testing. Highly recommend that you have somebody that you're testing this for, because unfortunately, inside of the lakehouse, there are some differences in things that you might have been accustomed to with SQL Server. And one of them is you cannot impersonate users. So I can't just say impersonate Renee and just test it. I have to actually log into somebody else to test it. Really annoying. Wish it wasn't like that, but that's the way the world is. So we need to accommodate for that. So we're going to be doing all of our development here, looking at the worldwide importers database here. And you can see that there are a number of different tables. And I just want to start off again. Here I am, Renee, showing you what Renee can see. Now, if you take a look at this, there's a lot of PII data, which generally speaking that you want to limit the access for. So we're probably going to be taking a look at limiting some of the information that Renee can see, because we don't want to give access to all the PII data in the world. I also want to take a look at this salesperson table. because a salesperson table has a key and whether or not they're salesperson. This is part of the not great data that they give you so that you can clean it up. And I've decided that Renee doesn't need to see this. So the reason why is that this is kind of a mess and this has been fixed inside of unique salesperson. So Renee doesn't need to see this at all. So let's take a look at what I can do to eliminate the ability for people to see this information. For starters, what I'm going to do is I'm going to deny select on salesperson because I determined it's kind of garbage data anyway, and Renee doesn't need to see that. So if I say that I want to deny select on a table into the username, now, yes, I would use groups, but not in my scenario. And I'm going to go ahead and execute this. Now, again, you can see that I am in my endpoint here. So I'm not, this isn't a database. This is, of course, my endpoint for Fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and deny select here so that Renee can't see it. So if we go back to Management Studio and refresh my database here, close this, because that's kind of cheating. And I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. And again, this is Renee, not me. And I've just changed her permissions. And now we can see, as soon as this is done expanding, that it's gone. So while Renee used to be able to see the salesperson table, which I can see, because I've said that she can't see it, can't see it anymore. It's like it's not even there. So you can definitely create roles to implement any PII you have within your lakehouse to do something like this. Now, I've also determined that there's a lot of PII data here that I don't think that Renee should see. So let's figure out how we can mask that information. And of course, you can do this on your lakehouse as well as on the warehouse as well. So what I want to do is I don't think that anybody needs to see the postal code because then you can look up where people live. So what I'm going to do is I am going to add a masked function on postal code. And I want to do a partial. So what's going to happen is it's going to have 3 stars in it and do 2 characters. And I cut and pasted this. So I need to make sure that I have the appropriate closing parenthesis here. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. Now, the reason also that I created Renee is if I'm like, great, I have a masking rule. But if I select this table that I just masked, because I, of course, have all the rights on the world and I'm not interested in changing that, it didn't change at all for me. I can see what I need to see, which is what I would expect. But Renee, not me. So if we take a look at the customer and select for Renee now, notice that she sees a masked value. So starting at 0, she sees 3 stars. So she can no longer access the information in the postal code. Not able to see that. And one thing to remember too is that the rules are different for things like text values, which is what this is, versus say a credit limit. And I've decided I don't want her to see the credit limit either. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to create a new masking rule so that you can't see the credit limit, which is obviously a decimal number. And for that, I'm going to mask with the default function. So I'm not going to change this into text and only see X's. I'm just going to change this to a 0. And that's why I'm using this default function to make sure that that's how Renee's going to see this from now on. Again, it's not text, so I can't do this. By the way, you can use whatever character you want. I like stars. Stars are obvious. But here I cannot do that because it is not text. It is a numeric value. So I'm going to go ahead and run this and then go ahead and look at it as Renee. So we'll go ahead and select this value. And now all Renee sees for the credit limit is 0. So Renee may think that it's busted. I don't know. But this is the two ways that you can mask your different data. So I can, grant access to things as well. I can also, of course, if I'm doing this with Power BI and this isn't a mirroring situation, I will probably create views and then grant or deny access to the views that I want to do as well. So you have full feature functionality as to what you want to let people to see. And you can have, then treat your lakehouse more like what you did when you're using SQL and have it do all the different security properties within the database. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the database now, if I'm looking at this table and I just say that I want to script it, we can see that I've got masking rules that have been added to it. So we can see that I've got, masked functions that I have added here so that there's no longer be able to, you can see them. So you can always see this. Of course, if you ever need to drop them, you just alter the table and then drop those masked functions. So these are then visible wherever she looks at the data we're being connected. So I'm currently, log in obviously to Management Studio, but I can do the same thing inside of Fabric. Naturally, different monitor. So I'm going to go ahead and log into Fabric. Not as me, but as Renee, if I do this right. Sign back in as Renee on this particular instance. No, that's the thing that's annoying about when you do this. Well, I'm going to use in private window because that's the easiest way to make sure that you're logging in as you want. I don't want you to log me in. I want to log in myself. One thing that I didn't think about doing. All right. Now go to Fabric. And then if we take a look at workspaces, Fabric workspace, and then take a look at my lakehouse. I'm going to take a look at it as a SQL endpoint because that's really what I wanted Renee to see anyway. It'll load here, and again, this isn't me. But we all notice that, yes, I see my postal code and credit limit as all zeros. So Renee is now not seeing anything that I don't want her to see. And so that is going to be, of course, covered in all Fabric elements. So while I have rights, so I can still see everything. All right, hopefully there aren't any questions with that. And I do hope that you incorporate this because this is kind of a neat feature. And I think it's sometimes that people just kind of look at row level security and kind of stop there. There's no reason not to mask your data or to keep people out of things you don't want them to see using regular security like you would do if you were using SQL Server. So you can do that with of course, your SQL endpoint for Lakehouse or your warehouse, either one. All right. Let's move on to other levels of security that we might add inside of Fabric. Now, RBAC has been added, and RBAC is in preview. Now, RBAC and OneLake are very similar in that everybody has a default reader. So you can read everything, which is kind of what you would kind of get. You can, if you do not want everyone to have default reader, then what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to either modify the default reader permissions or just remove default reader and create new roles as you want to. Now, this is going to inherit subfolders unless you specify otherwise. And you may get access to shortcuts that you cannot access. So RBAC is not going to look at the fact that you don't have the ability to access a shortcut. So you may see a shortcut that you can't do anything with. So just keep that in mind that is a way that it works. So how this works is basically you request to read the folder, and then it's going to take a look at the permissions for coarse grain access, and then it's going to evaluate for fine grain access. So there you go. And Andy, great question on the SQL permissions, because yes, if you are doing anything inside of a lakehouse that you've modified it, then it will be honored, but it'll break direct lake. However, if you are using a Azure SQL DB, you can implement masking there. And that's basically if you're using if you're using anything that's mirrored, then you're going to have to make sure that you implement it with your source anyway for pretty much all that stuff. Can't even create views without busting back to direct query. Great question though. And hi, Rishi. All right, let's talk about the different roles though inside of OneLake. So basically you can have different roles for whatever you want. So you can create custom roles for to only specify certain folders inside of OneLake. And for each folder in OneLake, you can assign users, security groups, or an automatic assignment based on the workspace role. So with OneLake Access, you've got a lot of different levels that you can choose to incorporate. So you can also choose to use RBAC security, to use that to grant access to folders. But that only applies when you're accessing OneLake directly. But let's take a look at how we can do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to Fabric, of course. And this is the one where I'm logged in, right? Yes. So what I'm going to do is take a look at my workspace here, Fabric workspace, and I'm going to go back to worldwide importers, and I'm going to manage permissions for this particular folder. So let's take a look at this just from a lakehouse perspective of what I've got going on here. So what I have going on is that I have files in from my Azure Data Lake Gen 2, and then those files are shortcutted into my Explorer, and then I've got items to do it here. So since this has got a shortcut, I'm not going to use RBAC security on this particular one because I'm using a shortcut to another folder, and that just gets more complicated. So let me pick another one when I'm going to pick up my Acme sales. Oh man, do I have anything that's not shortcutted? I know I do. I tend to shortcut everything, and because I've got a lot of data inside of my OneLake. All right, so I've got some files that are listed here in my New York property sales database. So I've got some CSV files that I have loaded into location and to orders. So what I'm going to do here is this, I'm going to manage OneLake access to this actual data that I happen to have here. So what I'm going to do is, as of course, select this option here where I am managing OneLake data access. Of course, it says preview, which is pretty obvious. So from within here, this is where I'm going to turn this on. Come on. Wow. That's wild. I don't know why it's not doing that. I'm gonna have to pick something else because it's playing games with me. Of course, this worked when I was doing a demo a little while ago. So let me do something else. All right. I am going to pick data from my lake houses here. Oh, that's a shortcut. Typical, I am doing a presentation demo issues. Getting annoyed. If I can get somebody to one of my items to load so that I can go ahead and test this. So when I can load one of these up, and I did not obviously do sacrifices to the demo gods, Armando. This isn't going to let me do this, but if I was able to select I manage one lake here, what it would then allow me to do, which it's not going to do here because this is a shortcut, is it's going to show me my roles. And the roles that I have initially is, of course, the default role. And what I'm going to do is delete that default role and then add new roles to it. So let's see if it's going to play nice now. And let me load something else up. And then go ahead and take a look at my model and see about creating a shortcut to it. Excuse me, creating security for it. And I'm going to do that inside of Sandbox. And then take a look at my lake house. Filter so that I only see lake houses, and then I can get this to open up. Well, that's great. All right. And this one has no data in it. Lovely. This is one that I've got data in. Great. All right, so I'm going to manage my one lake data access, turning on my data access roles. Go ahead and say continue. And here's where my new role exists. And so what I want to do, of course, is I've got to delete this. And that means that nobody can then access this. So then the first thing that I'm going to want to do then, of course, is to create a new role. And I'm going to call this read data. And of course, it can't contain any read data. So what I want to do is I can do selected folders. So I've got just the one folder, so I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to save. And this is going to create a role that I can grant people to read bronze. So then they can only have the ability to look at my bronze data within here. So if I wanted to create a new role that allows people to just to select specific ones, here I could, just select this folder as well. and say manage data access, and then I can create a new role and then perhaps give this just a view, selected folders. And here we can see that I've got the one folder, but I could do for selected folders, I could just say that I wanted to have them only to take a look at the goal data. And so this would be, so I'm going to call this view goal. And then all that they would have the ability to do then would be to view these different elements within my model. So I can then, of course, want to assign users to this so that I can then give people a more granular view of the data so that I'm not necessarily giving people everything that they might have access to. So I definitely think that this is going to be something that you're going to want to implement within your different roles because it's a really, really handy when it works. And hopefully you don't have to restart your machine to make that all happen. So, all right, so let's wrap this up after I was able to successfully add roles. So what you want to do with these different options is now you've got different things that you can do. So you need to determine how you're going to implement these different changes. What are you going to do in the lakehouse? What are you going to do with the semantic model? What are you going to do? How are these different things going to be organized? You need to develop the different roles that you're going to use. If you're going to use lakehouse or if you're going to use with RBAC. And then to make sure that you've got the Entra security groups to support different levels of access for these things. So this is really a security structure that perhaps you didn't think about when you implemented Fabric that you definitely need to accommodate for now, as things have definitely changed. All right, so I have reviewed workspace security and then, of course, item security, making sure that you remember you do have the ability to turn off the ability to see different things inside of your lakehouse, something that you may want to implement. Looking, of course, at RBAC and then OneLake data access roles. And yes, that plus RBAC are currently in preview. So with that, thank you very much. And let me know if you have any questions.